Southwestern Family of Companies welcomes you to the Action Catalyst. Each week, our diversely and amazingly accomplished guests share their insights and inspirations to help us ignite our own. So let's invest attention together to breathe, to reflect and refocus, and decisively defeat that voice we call Mr. Mediocrity. Then let's enjoy moving forward to make a positive difference in our world.
We look forward to sharing our guest with you today. David Cote is Executive Chairman of Vertiv Holdings Co., a global data center products and services provider. Previously as CEO of the industrial giant Honeywell, he grew the company's market capitalization from around $20 billion to nearly $120 billion, delivering returns of 800% and beating the S&P by nearly 2.5 times. Now as an author, in his new book, Winning Now, Winning Later: How Companies Can Win in the Short Term While Investing in the Long Term, Cote rails against today's trend of short-termism and debunks the notion that pursuing long-term business growth must come at the expense of short-term gains. Drawing from his remarkable turnaround case study at Honeywell, Winning Now, Winning Later shows how to run any organization, division, or team, whether a nonprofit or for profit, with a new kind of rigor and balance.
Welcome to the Action Catalyst. Today we have David Cote with us as our guest. Welcome to the Action Catalyst, David.
Well, it's very good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, there is some really interesting topics to hop into today, and I have a long list of questions for you, but I wanted to start off with your experience at Honeywell and reading your bio and what all you did with Honeywell as the CEO there for many years seems so interesting, specifically how before you took over, it was in a bit of a loss type of situation and how you took it from that to a profit. What did you do to make that happen?
Well, that's a long answer. That's the whole book, actually. All right, I guess let me try to be a little more succinct with it, and we can see where you want to go. There were a number of things we had to do because the company had gone through 4 years of turmoil with deals that had been done, deals that had not been done, succession, all that kind of stuff. And the company was very much in turmoil getting there. And interestingly, I was not considered it was not widely expected that I was going to be successful with it. And there was, I can remember it was on one TV show where when I got there, they said, well, if we're not sure this company can be turned around, and if it can, we're not sure this is the right guy to do it because he didn't make it into the first tier of the GE succession race. And we know he wasn't even the first choice to run Honeywell. So what chance does this company have? So it was kind of an interesting way to begin, especially when you end up finding out that as bad as it looked externally, it was even worse internally. There were just all kinds of issues, no focus on process, culture, globalization, empty pipeline, new products and services, a lot of unhealthy, aggressive accounting that had gone on, not a lot of cash flow. So there were unrecognized liabilities for asbestos, environmental, pension. So there were a lot of issues to deal with. And they took me by surprise because, interestingly, for the first 4.5 months, as the CEO, I was not allowed to see the books. So I was just expected to learn the businesses and somebody else would handle that. And in fact, when I asked a finance guy from time to time how the quarter was going, they would say, I'm sorry, but we've been instructed not to answer those questions from you. Okay, well, I guess I'll just wait. So I was kind of more than kind of a surprise in July and August when the magnitude of the issues first became aware of them. And I didn't have a staff I could trust. I didn't have a board I could trust. So really, and we can go into any of that you want, but I found myself saying, okay, well, I'm going to have to figure this out. You don't just walk out. And I felt like the first thing I had to do was scrub the accounting and business practices down to something that was real. And I've often said, and started there, was that accounting was our primary information system. So if we couldn't rely on what was coming out of the accounting system, we would make bad decisions because we would think things were more or less profitable than they actually were. And we needed to start there. A second big item was establishing what culture did we want. And that's where we came forward with our 12 behaviors. I initially had 10, and in working with my staff, we decided that we needed 12, that while God was able to fix the world with 10 commandments, we needed 12 to fix Honeywell. So we went forward with those. And that worked because it really helped to establish a culture, and then also established 5 initiatives, none of which on their own or together are brilliant. It was growth, productivity, cash, people, and our enablers, the things that we would focus on to make things better. But we were relentless about it. And I can remember my communications guy coming in at the end of one year saying, geez, could you give me the initiatives for next year so that we can really get ahead of it with the posters and stuff? And I was just surprised. And I looked at him, and he still is a little embarrassed by this. And I put that story in the book. But I said, well, do you really think we're done with these yet? And that ended up, we stuck with him for the whole time I was there, because I think that constancy of purpose and culture ends up being really important over time. We spent a lot of time on process. I'm a big believer that any business, any organization is just a collection of processes, most of them cross-functional. And the bigger your company is, the less cross-functionally it acts. So you have to think through, what do you do on process? Because every process can be made more effective and more efficient. So how do you do that? Focused on growth initiatives. For us, customer service was a big one because we had a problem there. Then acquisitions. What would we do with new products and services? And what would we do with globalization? So we embarked on all of those, all at the same time. Well, months apart, but close enough that it was a lot of change going on at the same time. And we were successful with it. And we didn't do it with any kind of big bang. I've always felt that whenever anything has transformational or revolutionary next to it, there's a good chance something will go wrong. And I'm a big believer in evolution, as I talk about it with any person, business, organization, whatever it is, that you want to be changing faster than your external circumstances, customers, competitors, technology. But if you're not changing faster, at some point you need a revolution in order to get ahead or catch up. And revolutions, you just never know where they're going to go. So how do you change thoughtfully, consistently, faster than everybody else, so that you get the miracle of compounding to work for you? Because once you get it moving, and you're doing better consistently, just a bit better than everybody else, well, that compounding effect is pretty substantial, as Ben Franklin pointed out.
Wow. You're right. That was a complex answer to a
sorry
to a big question. What advice would you give to a leader as you're implementing some of these steps? And what should you watch out for and kind of navigate through the harder time?
Yeah, good. There's a phrase that I've always liked, originated, I believe, with the Japanese, and I had a boss who used to use it a lot, that I really liked, that says, go slow to go fast. Now, it doesn't mean go slow to go slow. What it does mean, though, is take the time to put some thought into what it is you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes people just get way over eager to just start demonstrating action. And it's similar to the problem with going too slow, where you spend all your time analyzing, but it can be just as destructive. Because if you go too fast and you end up learning you don't really know what you're doing, you end up with change that just doesn't work. It doesn't take with the people. Customers don't care for it. So take the time to figure that out. And whether it's a growth initiative, for example, globalization. We looked at it and said, we need to do a better job of globalization. We only had something like 44% of our sales outside the US. And it's too easy to just say, go around the world, just, get started around the world everywhere. And we looked at it differently and said, well, look, we're not that good at this. So tell you what, we're going to focus on China and India. And we're just going to concentrate on those two and make sure we do a great job there. Because if we do, that's 2.5 billion people. And whatever we learn, we can then transfer to other countries. That worked extraordinarily well for us. Same thing when we were implementing the Honeywell operating system, where think of it as mostly the Toyota production system, just how do you apply it to an existing company? Well, one of the things we ended up, a good decision that we ended up making was we did the best practice visits. Then we developed how we were going to do it ourselves. And because it's very different than if you go into a new plant and interview 100 people for every person you hire. Very different if you're going into a plant where, say, average length of service is 20 years and the plant's been there for 85 years. And having been an hourly employee, I know you don't go in on Friday and say, hey, you just keep working the way you are. But Monday, you come in prepared to do the Honeywell operating system, so bring an entirely different mindset in. It's just not how people are. It doesn't work. So we took our template, if you will, and tried it in 10 factories. Came back after 6 months and said, okay, revise the template because it worked in some, not in others. Then tried the new one in 5. After 6 months, came back and it worked in 3, not in 2, and said, okay, let's really hone this down. Then we tried it in 2. We said, okay, now we got something that works. And we had about 250 factories at the time and said, okay, what we're going to do is start with 25. And we are going to resource the hell out of those 25 to make sure that this thing works. And interestingly, once you have something that works and people can see results coming out of it, well, then you get a lot more pull. Because to the extent you're trying to push change, it doesn't work all that well. You get a lot of what I call compliance with words rather than compliance with intent. So yeah, they'll get you all the check marks, everything's happening, you feel good. But then you go to look at your numbers and go, gee, we're not growing any faster. We're not any more profitable. There's no more cash. Well, what the heck happened to all of this? And you find that you just didn't bring people along with you to get that done. So there's this big cultural change, mindset change that has to go along with it. And for what it's worth, I've always said there are 3 big principles to leadership. The first one is the ability to mobilize a large group of people. I've also said that's the most visible. It's the one that most leaders get measured on. Can you give an inspiring speech? But really, it's only 5% of the job. The other next 2 steps are the biggest ones. The second one is, can you pick the right direction? Whatever your vision is, whatever you're trying to accomplish, can you as a leader pick the right direction? And I've said, if you've got everybody mobilized and you pick the direction and you spend the next 40 years wandering in the desert because you didn't do such a great job there, you're not a good leader, no matter how exciting you might be. Then the third one, which touches on what we were talking about, is you've got everybody mobilized, you've picked that direction. Can you now get everyone moving step by step in that direction so that you're starting to make progress? And it's really important when you start making that progress, or you think you are, to stay away from confirmation bias and instead to focus on falsification bias. Look for those things that say, I made a mistake. I didn't make a good decision. Now, the organization can't sense that you're doing that, because if there's any ambiguity about what your goal is, that's not good for an organization. But you as a leader need to always be looking over your shoulder, looking for that falsification bias to say, is this or is it not working? And I had if this goes on too long, let me know, but I had a great example where I ignored falsification bias, and that was with my implementation of Six Sigma. I'd done it the way I'd seen it occur at my previous company and thought, okay, I'll just do the same thing. Got everybody trained, everybody working on stuff, and I'd get all the feedback. Yeah, it's working great. We're doing this many people are trained. And I just kind of fell into that. And it was like, I don't know, 9 years after I'd started it, I happened to visit an aerospace factory in Malaysia. And they were bragging, taking me from workstation to workstation to show, wow, we got this design and it was only like 55% producible. Now we've got it up to 76% first time pass. And I looked at it and said, 76%? We've been working on this for 9 years. How can we possibly still have designs that yield is that bad? And what I ended up learning was the business had just taken all these unproducible designs, and rather than fix the designs, put them in a low-cost factory so that bad designs would cost less, which was totally anathema to what we were trying to accomplish with Six Sigma. So I had to go back and retool the whole thing to say, how are we going to do this differently? And as an example, we're doing it very differently in the new company I'm associated with, Vertiv, where we're spending a lot of time up front to say, okay, rather than this broad brush, how do we focus first? Show people it works so we start to build that pull rather than have everybody agonizing about this push program and getting a lot of confirmation bias. Wow.
I love that. Stay away from confirmation bias and look for falsification bias.
Yep. Look for things that aren't working. Is it working the way you think it is? And that's why I spent a lot of time traveling. I spent 500 to 600 hours a year on the plane, air travel, just going from place to place, meeting with sales guys, meeting with customers. And you find out some interesting stuff. I guess the third year I was doing it, visited an aerospace customer at an air show. And, the business had wanted me to do this. I met with the president was with me, the sales manager, the product manager, and they wanted me to talk about this new product. So I went in and started talking to the CEO. And the first question I always ask a customer CEO is, so how are we doing with what you've given us already? And a customer CEO looked at me and said, well, I'm really glad you dropped by because we've just about finalized our lawsuit against you, which we intend to give you in 2 weeks for non-performance on this new product. And I was just shocked. And I turned to the business leader. He was shocked. The product guy was shocked. The sales guy was shocked. And I wonder, how can we all be this shocked about something? It shows that none of us are really connected. So that was a really good falsification bias I got just by visiting with customers.
Wow. Critical thinking involves being critical.
Yeah, it does. I'm not saying ignore the stuff that's working, but that's kind of the human nature to look for that and, I must have made a really good decision because this is working. And it's too easy to fall into that because it's a lot more comfortable. But if you find stuff that's not working, you can add a lot of value by addressing it.
That's absolutely right. Tell us a little bit about your journey. You hinted at it with some of what you were saying a minute ago, where you came from GE and you were at GE for a long time. And I love the story, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, but you started off as an hourly worker and you were promoted 3 times relatively quickly compared to GE standards. How did you do that? And what were the learning lessons that led up to getting to where you are today while you were at GE?
Well, I guess there's a couple of connections to make in that story. The first one was I'd say I was pretty much a screw off most of the time growing up. School came easily to me. I didn't have to do that much. And I felt like I was wasting my time in school. I just thought it was a total waste of time. How was I ever going to use any of this stuff? And I considered quitting when I was in high school as a senior. And then I did quit. I got accepted at the University of New Hampshire. And instead of going, I said, I don't want to do this. I worked in my dad's garage and that didn't work out so well. And then I worked with my uncle as a carpenter, went out to Michigan. And I ended up learning that while I could understand a lot of things, making any of that stuff come out of my hands was impossible. I just can't do it. I can't fix anything. So I ended up going back to school, and with some trauma associated with getting back into school, but I did. And I spent 2 years there living on campus. Always hated not having any money. It's how we grew up, and it's how I was living going to school. And I got called to the assistant dean of students office at the end of my sophomore year. And she said, we're not going to allow you to live on campus anymore. I said, well, why? Well, what's the problem? And I had, of course, the jeans, flannel shirt, long hair, which was in vogue back then. And she said, well, there's no one big thing. It just seems like no matter where you are, there's trouble. You're just a general troublemaker. And you could tell I'm still kind of proud of that. But I said, okay, well, I got to do something different. So I got a job eventually at GE working nights, and I went to school during the day. And a buddy and I bought a fishing boat to go cod fishing off the coast of Maine, and that's how we were going to make our fortune. So did that, and we were very unsuccessful. So he got married, and his wife basically said, you're not going to keep fishing with that idiot friend of yours, are you? So we sold the boat, and I'd gotten a 1.8 that semester, and I had quit school again in order to be a fisherman. I got married. We were living in a third floor, unheated, uninsulated apartment in New Hampshire, so it's a little chilly in the winter. And first month I'm home. First month we're married. She comes home and says, I'm pregnant. I said, okay, well, how did that happen? I thought you were on the pill. And she said, well, those things happen. Okay. Fourth month, she says, I can't work anymore. And I got a little nervous. I did the math and found out that even spending no money on anything, presents for Christmas or anything like that, we were spending $2 a week more than I was making. And I've often said all those people who talk about those great old days when a blue-collar job could support a family, no, that wasn't true. I was there. It wasn't true. Maybe true for some jobs, but not for most. And I had $100 in the bank, so I had 50 weeks to figure out what to do. And that's when I figured, okay, I got to go back to school. And I always tell my oldest son, Ryan, I said, you're the reason I'm successful because you scared the bejesus out of me. And I thought my kid's going to die because I'm a screw-off. And I remember bringing him home in February and having to tape up all the windows because the draft that was coming in was moving the curtains, and I thought it was going to hurt him. And I've never been so scared in my life as I was then. I eventually got an exempt job in GE. Once I graduated, after about a month or so, I managed to get what was called an exempt job, so I could wear a suit and all that stuff. And I just kind of kept working my way up, took a job on what's called the corporate audit staff. So I spent 5 years traveling the world, auditing different businesses, which was just a tremendous experience because I learned a lot. Because every quarter you were looking at a different business, you were in a different location, and it got you really comfortable with being out of your comfort zone because you were always out of your comfort zone. You just had to learn how to manage that. That helped to accelerate my career. And then the big step, I would say, that you were talking about on the 3-level jump is I had an interaction with Jack Welch, the CEO, that I thought was going to kill my career. In fact, I thought I was going to be fired. But instead, it turned into just this tremendous accelerator for me. And I've always told people advancement requires two things: performance and visibility. And that interaction with Jack gave me a tremendous amount of visibility. And I'd been performing, but it has to really get noticed. And he did. And I could take you through that story. It's a longer one, but he included it in his book when he wrote his book, I guess 20 years ago now.
I'd love to hear that. There's a lot of listeners who probably are at the edge of their seat saying, yes, I want to know how to have advancement in my career. How did you do it?
Well, like I said, it always takes two things: performance and visibility. If you're an average performer, it's not going to make a difference. But you got to have visibility for it. People have to see it. People who can make a difference in your career have to see it. So I was responsible for sending out what was called a strategic plan request in this corporate job that I had at GE in Fairfield, Connecticut. It was a thick document, and the international guys and the business development guys would send it along, would piggyback on my request. And before I sent it out, I actually had a meeting with my boss and his staff where I said, I don't think we should do this anymore. We send out all this stuff. People fill out all these templates, and then we don't do anything with it. It just sits in my desk drawer. And Jack has been big on eliminating bureaucracy. We should not do this. And I was voted down to a person. They all said, no, this is important. We got to do it. So I sent it out. Separately, about 2 months later, I had been assigned to work on Jack's board pitch for the first time I'd ever had to do that. So I'm running around and I get a call from my secretary saying, Jack wants to talk to you. So this is, remember, 1985 or so. And I get myself mentally prepared. Okay, what's the status of his board pitch, subject by subject? So I pick up the phone and he said, Dave, is it true we asked medical systems for what the ROI will be in the ultrasound business in 1989? And I'm like totally perplexed. On the other end of the line, trying to think, where the hell is this coming from? What could this question possibly be? And it finally dawned on me, okay, it must be part of that strategic plan request. So I said, yes, we do as part of this project. Man, he came through the phone at me like you wouldn't believe, with the cursing and the yelling, and told me he wanted to see it right away up in his office. So I said, okay, so ran back to my office, got the request, ran it to gave it to his assistant, his executive administrator, and she said, okay, you can go now, Dave. And I said, I think he wants to see me. So she walks it into him, and all of a sudden I hear this scream, Dave, get in here. So I walk in, and he's sitting there with the head HR guy, whose name is also Jack. And he's just flipping through the pages as fast as he can, just pissing himself off, just going through the whole thing. And he just starts cursing at me, asking me why I would do such a stupid thing. And so I'm just explaining, okay, well, it's a financial expression of the strategic plan. This is one of the things we do to make sure the strategic plans make sense, et cetera, et cetera. And this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes with him just, no matter what I said, he was yelling and cursing. And he turned to the HR guy and said, hey, you used to run Jesco. Did you ever have to do this? And he said, no, I didn't. And like I said, my mouth kind of gets away from me sometimes. And I looked over at him because I was getting annoyed. And I said, well, actually, you did. And he said, well, I ran that business. I should know whether I did it or not. I said, well, it's in my desk drawer. If you want to see it, I can go get it for you. But you guys did do it. So Jack Welch dismisses me, and I leave. And I called my wife at the time, and I said, I think I've just been fired. This was really an unpleasant experience. And I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think I've been fired. Well, nothing much happened. Well, I do get a call from the CFO later that day saying, can we stop it? And I said, no, it's coming in tomorrow. We'll look even worse if we do that. I mentioned it to some of my colleagues, and interestingly, their first question was, you didn't tell them that we recommended that you do it, did you? And I said, no, I didn't. And they just, had a sigh of relief. So fast forward a couple of months, and I had been on the RCA acquisition team as the junior finance guy. So we go to the RCA victory party, and all of a sudden I hear Jack yell, Dave, get over here. So I go walking over, and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to get fired here. I've heard all the stories about what he's like. He's going to fire me at a victory party. Ugh, jeez. Okay, well, so I got myself steeled up for it. And my buddy, fortunately, came with me. And Jack looked at me and said, I was never so pissed at anybody since I was in plastics. And I looked at him and said, well, I really appreciated you sharing it with me. It was quite an experience. And he thought that was funny. Thank God he was in a good mood. And we talked for a little bit. And then my buddy looked at him and said, Jack, Dave actually recommended against sending out that whole request. And we all voted him down and said he had to do it. And I still remember Jack looked at me with his look of surprise, and he took his fist and put it to his side and said, so, wow, you just took the knife for those guys? And I said, well, I didn't really look at it that way. It's not like it was anything illegal. You don't throw in your friends for something like that. He just kept shaking his head and saying, wow, okay, wow, that's really something. So we walk away because, the conversation changes, and the CFO pulls me aside after a couple hours and says, hey, let's talk for a bit. So we go outside and sit by the fountain, and he said, you have no idea how much good you've done yourself with what's happened here. I said, well, I am hard pressed to understand how, because it sure as hell doesn't feel that way. And he said, no, he has said that the way he yelled at you, he has made vice presidents cry, and you just kind of held your ground through the whole thing, and were very polite, respectful, but made your points, and then you left. And then when he found out tonight that you didn't throw in your buddies when you could have, just to try to escape from the whole thing, good things are going to happen to you. So it used to be in GE, it was big companies had all these levels. And if you got a 1-level jump, it was considered you were doing well. If you got a 2-level jump, it was considered just amazing. You were a high flyer, you were on fire. Well, all of a sudden, Jack had me interviewing for jobs that were 3 and 4 levels higher. And I got one that was 3 levels. I went from having no people to having 200 and having to try to figure all this stuff out. And it ended up being a troubled business because the following year, sales were down 25%. So we had to figure out what the hell to do. But it ended up being just a great learning experience. And that's one where visibility helped me.
Wow. That is an amazing story. Again, I feel like I just watched a movie. That was better than the movie that my wife
very kind.
Last night. That was amazing.
Well, it was, as you can tell, I still remember it pretty vividly because it really stuck with me. I went from thinking I'd been fired to, 2-3 months later, all of a sudden I've got this huge new job with all the goods and bads that go with that. A bunch of people who think, oh man, got to support this guy. And then a bunch of people saying, oh man, who is this clown thinking he can be, get promoted that fast.
Well, and what a learning lesson for all the listeners to think through. What Jack Welch respected was your integrity, and that you
that's nice. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's good.
There's so many learning lessons in that story to take away and to apply. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're somebody that's a stay-at-home parent and schooling your kids right now to a CEO. Those are lessons that are the fundamentals of when you do that, good things happen to you. More responsibility is given to you because you're able to handle when you're able to handle things under pressure. Then when things are good, you're going to take care of doing the right thing always. And so, wow,
that's good. You're really good at this. There's some good stuff there.
Well, I know one of the things that's similar to that, right out of your book, is this question: why is it dangerous for companies and investors to focus on short-termism and to feel that long-term can only be achieved at the expense of short-term performance. And this story seems to lead right into that. So,
yeah, that's good. So a couple of things that points I would make. The first one is one of the things I found frustrating is all this discussion about how bad short-termism is. And all of the conversation seems to be geared towards you are either short-term or you are long-term focused. Yeah, you don't do both. They're mutually exclusive. And this gets into the second point that one of the principles that we ran Honeywell on was that life and business are always about trying to accomplish two seemingly conflicting things at the same time. And it's not just about balance. It's about trying to figure out, is there something you can do that will benefit both of those conflicting goals? So think of it this way. If you run a business with inventory, do you want low inventory or do you want good customer delivery? If you're in the marketing and sales organization, do you want high prices and margin rates or do you want big volumes? If you're trying to figure out how to empower people, do you want people closest to the action empowered, or do you want to have good control so nothing bad happens? If you've got staff functions, do you want those staff functions to work at the lowest cost possible, or do you want to have great internal service? The answer in every case is you want both. And I used to say this to people all the time is, yes, I want it right and I want it fast. This is not a choice I'm making. I want both. So you figure out how to do both. The same is true when it comes to short-term, long-term. You have to be looking at it and saying, how do I do both? If you just say to investors or your boss or whomever, depending upon what level you are, geez, my performance is really going to stink for 3 years. But then 3 years from now, it's going to be terrific. Investors will say, see you in 3 years. Your boss is likely to say, well, I'll get somebody else to do this in the meantime. You're also not going to know. You don't want to get to the end of 3 years and find out, oops, I was wrong. All that stuff I've been doing isn't going to pay off, which, by the way, happens. By the same token, so you want that kind of short-term validation points that say my long-term effort is working. By the same token, if you're just so focused on making the short-term and you don't have good plans to get there in a way that still supports long-term investing, then eventually it runs dry because you haven't done any of the seed planting that you need to be successful in year 1, 3, 5, 10, whatever. So you have to find a way to do both. Now, if you take a look at what we did at Honeywell, we first year and a half or so, we had to take some big hits because we had so many problems. We had to clean up the accounting, recognize asbestos, environmental, fix the pension plan, get the culture going. We just had a lot we had to do. After that first year and a half, you started to see our performance be very good relative to our peers, our short-term performance. But I used to always get asked by investors, why aren't your margin rates growing faster? And I used to have to tell them, well, it's because while I could grow earnings at, say, 14%, I was only growing them at 10 because I was taking the other 4% and reinvesting it in the business, whether it was the globalization effort, new products and services, the process work we were doing. And I would tell them I was doing the seed planting. Now, they didn't like it. I can't say that they applauded and said, oh, man, Dave, that's genius. That's really appreciate you doing that. So we outperformed our investor peers in the short term, but not by a huge amount. It really started to come together after about 6 years when all that stuff we had been doing, it just accumulates. You end up with this miracle of compounding, this cumulative effect. So, for example, take an R&D from about 3% of sales to about 6% of sales. We didn't do it all at once. We just kind of did it steadily, and kept investing in new products. Well, all of a sudden you have this plethora of new product, this new service that's coming out, and people are looking at it and going, wow, that's some really good stuff. Now you don't have to keep investing that much more in R&D. So you can finally start to reap the harvest, if you will. At the same time, you can continue to do seed planting at that same rate, if that makes sense.
Wow. That is brilliant. Yeah, you can't eat your seed feed.
No. Yeah, you need your seed corn you got to keep planting it. But it's also it's possible to go. We were talking about go slow to go fast. It is possible to go too fast with something like that too. And if you're trying to, say, do the seed planting at a rate that the organization can't handle, then you're just going to waste a bunch of money. So that's why I always figured, okay, I'm going to keep steadily increasing the R&D rate, but I'm going to give some return to share owners also, because I just don't think I can effectively spend it.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. And I think there's a lot of people taking notes of that, sitting there going, wow, am I sacrificing the short-term gain for the long-term payoff? And I think that's applicable to life in general. You don't have to be a business person where it's easier everybody wants to get rich quick. Everybody wants to lose weight by taking the pill. And nobody's actually willing to do the difficult side of things and stay the course and invest with a long-term strategy in mind. That is amazing. Well, I'm so interested in your book. So tell us, is this all a lot of this content and these stories found in the book, Winning Now, Winning Later? Tell us a little bit about why you wrote it and the content in the book. That's fascinating.
Well, thank you. A lot of this is in the book and more, as you might expect, because it's, 300 pages or so. I guess a couple of things. One, I got some strong endorsements to write a book. So I got support from guys as varied as Hank Paulson and Barack Obama to tell me, you really need to write a book about this stuff, about the leadership, how do you make some of these things happen. So that was one inducement. The second one was I felt like we really had done something unique at Honeywell, and I wanted to be able to document it and in a way that would be useful to people 20 years from now, just as much as it is today. And I wanted every page to be useful, because I'd read too many business books in my life where my kind of joke was every business book I've ever read would have made a great pamphlet. It's 10 pages of concept and something useful and 250 pages of stories that you can just kind of fly right through. So I wanted something that, okay, when you read it, every page could have something that could be useful to you. And I don't think the whole book is going to be useful to everybody 100%. But I do think that as people go through it, they're going to find, wow, there's stuff in here that I could do or that is really interesting. So I didn't want it to just be a lot of high-minded concepts. I wanted it to be a lot of, okay, this is how you do it. This is exactly what you're trying to get done. Whether it's how do you organize your calendar? How do you run a meeting? How do you think about how many leaders do you want to have? How exactly do you do mergers and acquisitions? And how do you do a transition? How do you handle a recession? How do you build a culture? Really stuff that's a lot more specific. I got to say, it was a lot of work to do it, a lot more work than I ever expected. But I got to admit, I'm pretty pleased with what we came up with.
Wow. And a couple more questions. This is just too much good content here to stop. I wanted to also, I know one of the chapters in the book is about overcoming adversity. You've made it through several recessions and downturns in the economy. Here we are. I think everybody will think about the year 2020, and with the pandemic, people being forced to shelter and work from home. You have a state of emergency, and it's global. So this is something that's different, and you'd probably have to go back to the Spanish flu to draw some comparisons. And I don't know what's going to end up happening into the future, but for where we're at right now, what would you say, how have you been managing the effects of COVID, and how are you encouraging people around you who are other leaders on how to make it through a time like this?
Yeah. To your point, this recession is very different than ones we've had in the past. Who knows exactly how long it'll go on or how difficult it will be? I've said the one thing I do know is that nobody else does know. So you have to be, as I like to say, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, because you just don't know. The thing that complicates this is the point you were making is there's a health issue involved. So you have to start first, of course, with whatever I'm doing, is this safe for everybody else? So that's very different than anything we've ever had to do in the past. Once you get past that, I'd say there's some general principles that I like to think about. The first one is, as a leader, don't panic. And if there's one thing an organization can't handle, it's if a leader is panicking about stuff. The leader is the one that has to be the most clear-headed about everything and really thinking through the ramifications of their decisions. And it gets into kind of the second point, which is leaders need to be really good at independent thinking. And I'm fond of saying that independent thinking is a lot more rare than being smart. You can find all kinds of smart people, went to great schools, and they can tell you exactly what the herd is thinking out there at any point in time. But this is a time where you really need to be able to think for yourself and say, okay, what do I think is true here? What's the best way to handle it? And how do I work my way through this? The next piece of it I would say is you shouldn't be trying to achieve consensus on anything, especially when you're dealing with a bunch of unknowable stuff, which this has. Your job as a leader, and this is where running an effective meeting matters, is to get all the facts and opinions so that you have all the information possible. Make sure you really discuss what the solution may be, and don't try to work for consensus. Work to make sure that you make the best decision possible and proceed with it. Once you've made that decision, going back to the beginning, is look for falsification bias. Was I wrong? You can't tell everybody you're doing that because they can't handle the fact that you might think you're wrong. But you have to really be looking for it to make sure that it's there. Last piece I might add is it's very easy when you're in the middle of a tough time to just think of it in terms of, well, this is going to be like this forever. So this is how I'm going to act. And I'm big on telling people that in the middle of the recession, when it's at its worst, is when you need to be thinking about recovery. How are you going to handle recovery? And in any business, it usually comes down to two things, suppliers and people. So that whatever it is you're doing as you make your decisions about how to cut costs or how to save cash, make sure you're thinking about, is this going to hurt my ability to recover? And it's one of the reasons that I've always liked furloughs, for example, a lot better than layoffs, because you preserve your industrial base. The last piece I might add is independent of the health issue, which always has to come first. I like to say that whatever you're doing, there's three constituencies you got to think of: your customers, your investors or owners, and your people. Of those three, customers have to come first. And whether it's a delivery of product or service, or the new things that you've promised are going to be out there, you have to find a way to continue to do a great job for them. Because when the recovery comes, they're going to remember whether you were there for them or not. So make sure you think about your customers. And whatever pain ends up occurring needs to end up being split between investors and employees in a way that, as the leader, you think is the most appropriate.
Wow. That is amazing. 5 steps. Don't panic. Leaders are the independent thinkers.
Yep.
Don't try to achieve consensus. Think about the future and the recovery, and customers come first. That
You
is
know, I should add one more, and that
Okay.
is there's a lot of pressure on a leader from employees when you're in a time like this to tell us what's going to happen. How bad is this going to get? The leaders that I've seen make mistakes here are the ones who actually try to come across like they know. And getting back to what I was saying before is the one thing I do know is that no one else does know. There's a lot of people that can talk about or can speculate this is what it's going to be, but none of us really know. And you got to be honest with your employees on that when they say, okay, this is our 3rd week of furlough. When does this stop? I mean, you got to be able to look them in the eye and say, I'm sorry, but I don't know. That's just unknowable at this point. It really depends on what happens out there. And none of us can know that yet. But here's what we're doing. It will end. And we're making sure that we continue to invest for the future. I should have mentioned that one also. It's one of the things that we made a point of doing is we continued all our growth programs. And we're doing the same thing at Vertiv now at the company I'm associated with. All the new product and service programs that we had going, the sales growth initiatives, all of those are still going on because as part of the recovery, this is a great way to steal a march on your competition.
Love that. Yes, absolutely. Don't act like you're a fortune teller. Stay focused on the here and now. Deal with real-time situations daily, and don't overreact and don't underreact. And to look at it every single day and make real-time decisions.
Keep doing the seed planting because it's too easy. As soon as the recession starts, you'll get it from your staff or people saying, well, the first thing we need to do is stop this new stuff. No, actually, that's the one thing we got to make sure we keep doing because that's what's going to make sure that we benefit from this recession better than our competitors do because we've kept doing the right things.
Yep. That is amazing. Well, I feel like I could talk with you all day. However, what would be the best way for people to connect with you and to get the book and just stay connected to amazing content like what we've talked about today?
Well, the book can be pre-ordered on Amazon now, and I'm on LinkedIn, so that's the best way to connect me. I avoided it for a lot of years, but now that I'm an author, I said, okay, now is the time. If I'm going to get the message out and make people aware, then this is a smart thing for me to do. So I'm on LinkedIn now.
Excellent. And if you're looking up the book, it's Winning Now, Winning Later, if they were to look that up on Amazon.
Yep. Blue cover.
Excellent. Well, David, we're so thankful to have you on the Action Catalyst. This has been such a great opportunity to meet you and hear these stories. And we're so thankful for having you on here.
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate the support and the questions. They were good ones.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. To stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and Twitter at Catalyst_Action. Thanks for listening.